Okay, so I've got both of these pieces cut and I put reference lines on them and I've got them glued. So what I'll want to do as I'm attaching these two is I'm going to start from the front because I want the front of my helmet to always look good. If you want imperfection, or if you're going to have imperfections, because I know you don't want them, you'll want them towards the back. So everything's linear and everything's fluid, with the exception that if you have an impurity, you're going to want it in the back. And as I'm going, I'm trying to bend it to a curve so it connects the way it's going to connect and how it's going to be on the actual helmet. And because it's going together and pulling from itself, you just have to go slow, and you're going to have to just push the pieces back together as it goes. The great thing about having a heat gun is you can heat this up and bend it a little bit before you actually make your glue. That way it already has its basic shape and the glue goes on there really nice and fluid. This went on pretty decently. It's pretty flat across the top. This was a 90-degree cut, so when the pieces go together, they're going to go together nice and smooth. If you do an angle, you'll have an obvious angle on the piece here. You're going to have a little bit of an angle on here anyway, just because this is the peak of the head, but doing a 90-degree cut is going to give you hopefully the most fluid and cleanest transition. It's not going to be perfect, and I didn't like the outcome, so on the helmet that I made, I put another piece of hobby foam over the top of it to try to hide it and cover it up. On this one, I'm probably just going to sand it, because the foam, if you have a high grit sand, you can use a really high grit sandpaper, sanding stick, a sanding pad, orbital sander, whatever it is you've got. Just have a high grit. When I say high grit, I'm talking more like a 300 grit. You can do a 220 grit, but you might have little grooves and pieces you can see in there. But I've got this piece cut. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the two side pieces, and then we'll start putting the brow and the forehead and everything together. And we're going to put them together from the front around the sides evenly so that it has a nice fluid look. Okay, so I've got the front piece. I put the two side pieces on the brow, and I've attached it to the head. So the head piece, this is all front to back, symmetrical. So when you're looking at it from the front, everything flows the way it should. That way if there's any impurities, they're not swaying left to right. I had a problem with the helmet I made for Scott Shooty where the mouthpiece is a little bit off. But that wasn't off of a pattern, that was all freehand, and it was the hardest thing I've ever had to build. So I made sure when I made these cuts, these are all at an angle, so that everything comes and has that angle that you want to look for. This piece here, during your pattern, you'll notice a little niche here. I just made a straight line cut through this and gave it a little three-dimensional curve that's going to be showing up in the helmet. It's not real intricate, but it's something very simple that's not even really in the pattern. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the side pieces. That way I make sure the very front piece, when it attaches to the brow, everything comes together evenly. So I need to put the side pieces on both at the same time. That way I can continue to do the front of the face. That way everything comes together front to back. Okay, so I've attached the two sides to the helmet. And if you'll notice, they flare out. But they flare out evenly because when I laid my pattern down to cut it on that roll, I made sure I had the same curve on each side, so it's going to pull evenly, so it's going to be pretty much symmetrical on each side. Even though it's curved on each side, it's curved the same amount on each side. So as I'm putting it together, the pieces will come together evenly and it'll come out really smooth and nice. What I didn't want is for it to flare up. Because flaring up, it's going to be kind of a pain because you're not going to have pieces attached to the bottom to hold it in place. Front to back, I got them in place. So now that I've got those pieces on, I can go ahead and start working on the front face piece. Okay, so now I've taken the face piece and I've cut the face piece out. I put the cheeks on with a nice little angle here. And I've taken this weird piece that you'll see in your template, and I cut that out and put it on the lower brow, and I offset it a little bit, if you'll notice. So this will be inset when I attach it to the rest of the helmet. And also, as it goes on, it'll help kind of give it at least a little bit of a look for a three-dimensional look. There's not much three-dimensional stuff on the pattern, but this is one of them. And I've attached it to the face prior to attaching it to the actual helmet. And I'm gonna, at this point, glue this all together. I'm gonna start with the mouthpiece to make sure I line this up perfectly center. And I'll get this piece glued together. At that point, I'll glue the two side pieces on. The last thing I'm going to do is attach the brow to the face. I want to make sure everything's good and symmetrical, and I have it flexed and bent where I want it, and then this piece will bring it all together. So I've got the face piece put on right at the very bottom where the mouthpiece goes. It's inset to the helmet as well as the face piece. So I have a nice groove going through here. That groove is probably going to be painted black to separate the gold and the red. So now I'm going to attach the two cheekbones. Alright, so we're looking pretty good. I've got the face on, the mouth, I've got the cheekbones on. And if you'll notice, the cheek isn't flush. It's got a little bit of an angle to it because this piece curves. And then I connected the brow to the face. So all in all, it's starting to look a lot more like Ironman. Actually, it totally looks like Ironman. So I'm going to do is finish out with the chin to give it a little more stability down here and to be done with it. And then I'll work towards putting on the back. Okay, so while working on the chin piece, you'll notice this piece here. It's got perforated lines on it. I went ahead and cut it along those perforated lines and cut this middle little section out. What that did as the foam piece is it's going to allow me to, when I glue it, to glue it in at a recessed amount to give it kind of a three-dimensional look. So now this chin piece has a three-dimensional look. On the very bottom, I cut a little bit, I don't know if you can see it on here, I cut a little shorter. That way when the bottom chin piece recesses also, it'll come in and connect at the same amount. So now I'm going to put this chin piece on. I'm going to cut the very bottom piece and recess that, and I'm going to glue that on so you can see what that looks like when it's finished. So to attach the bottom chin piece to the helmet, I had to sand it down on the edges so that when I attach it, it attaches clean and smooth. Because if it has these diamond plate ridges, you'll see a lot of ridges in it when you put it on. So I've sanded those down. I'm going to cut this piece out and recess that and glue it in. Okay, so I've got the chin piece put on completely. I've cut these pieces a little long so that when I got it put on, I can now use my razor and cut this flush. So I'll cut through this bottom piece here to flush this out. I've made indentions on here so I have a three-dimensional look on the chin. Tried to cut these at an angle. Didn't work out as well as I wanted, but I also cut it a little bit long so that now I can cut this and sand it flush so that all these pieces are going to be smooth. This piece here, it's not as tight and clean as I want, so I can go ahead and sand that down a little bit too when we're done. So all this area will be a little bit cleaned up. Like I said, as long as it's a high grit sandpaper, you can sand all this stuff relatively smooth. So what I'm going to do next is fill in this forehead piece. The piece that came with the template doesn't fit in here perfectly because it's cut for paper and a three-dimensional look. So I'm going to have to kind of make an adjustment. I may even have to make this piece from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that piece out, see how I can get it to fit, and put this piece in.